Welcome to the Last in Line podcast, where we discuss faith, hope, and truth in the lives of amazing servant leaders. You are in the right place if you crave purpose and if you hunger for a life of significance. This podcast applies biblical truth to our daily lives, and we pray that you walk away encouraged and inspired. This is the Last in Line podcast.
Gentlemen, it is an honor to welcome Connor Beaton to Last in Line podcast. He is the founder of ManTalks platform, training program, and podcast. He is the author of a book from 2023 called Men's Work, a practical guide to face your darkness in self-sabotage and find freedom. He grew up in Canada. He lives in New York currently. We talk about childhood in a home divorce with step parents that he really never connected with, and relationship with his father that needed some forgiveness and healing, which he got later in life, but as a teenager in those times was a little rocky for him to find identity, to find acceptance, to seek and gain that attention that every kid wants and deserves. So we talk about his journey of maybe a little rebellion, hitting rock bottom, realizing that he needed to deal with some of that trauma from his childhood. And we talk about the training he provides for his clients and the psychology behind it, talk a little bit about neurology science and physical healing. We talk about how a physical body can actually heal the psychological framework, and that we're three-part beings, being body, soul, and spirit. We talk about faith. He grew up in the church, but then realized there was significant degrees of hypocrisy growing up, and that sort of jaded him a little and sent him on a different path. But he is raising his kids in church. He is all about faith and spirituality in his training. And it was an honor, man. It was a healthy conversation. I really enjoyed it. It was productive. He's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to what men want, what they're trying to achieve, what is healthy, what avenues to take to build strength in all areas of life, and to create and cultivate that resilience that we all were called to exhibit. And so we talk a lot about just how pain can control your life, and everybody looks to deploy some sort of coping mechanism. But we all know that there are ways to cope, and there that serve us and other people, and there are ways that destroy us and other people. So we talk a little bit about some of that. But it's been great to get to know him, solid individual, and you guys are going to get a lot out of this. There's an hour stuffed full, chock full of meaty substance. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope you take notes. Help me welcome Mr. Connor Beaton to Last in Line podcast. Connor Beaton, great to meet you. Thanks for being on Last in Line podcast.
You bet, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you're kind of a big deal, it looks like. I mean, you've been doing this podcast deal a while. You got quite a bit of people listening to your content. You released a book a couple years ago. We're going to talk some about that. But help me land this plane in a soft, safe area. Let's go into your platform real quick. What about ManTalks is so resonating with guys? Like there's a ton of this out there, right? Wouldn't you say it's being more common, thankfully? I mean, I'm glad for that, but what makes yours stand alone, man?
Yeah, I mean, I think we really have interesting piece of the market where it's a lot of therapeutic content without it being fluffy and feminizing. And so our tagline is, it's not therapy, it's training. Mm-hmm. And so I really take a training-based approach to helping men to develop, mental competency, emotional competency, relational acuity, right? To be able to lead better, lead themselves better, lead their relationship better. And what we use is oftentimes therapeutic modalities that can support them in bettering themselves, being able to stop sabotaging, being able to lead their family and their relationship more effectively and not sort of get in the way, being able to emotionally regulate. So I really saw a need for it because I think the therapeutic industry has really let men down.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of guys, there's a stigma, I think, for us as men about going into therapy
Hmm.
because, so for some of us, we still see it as weak. We don't think it's going to be effective. And then sometimes that's true, right? We go into therapy and it's not effective because the therapist or the psychologist or the counselor or the coach um, has either a bias towards men or is trying to treat men like they would a woman and is trying to get an outcome with a man that a female is looking
Hmm.
for. And we look for different things, right? A lot of times women go into therapy looking for their emotions to be validated, looking for their experience to be validated. And men go into therapy sometimes looking for their experience to be validated, but they're often looking for solutions to their problems. Like, help me get better at
Hmm.
where I'm screwing up in life. And for a lot of therapists, they're not equipped to actually do that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what we do. Um, I could expand on it, but I think that's probably a good place to
Yeah,
start.
yeah, we're going to go into the book for sure too, because I think it touches maybe a little more on some of those layers. But um, tell us about a little bit about your childhood. Maybe even if you want to kind of fast forward up through middle school, teenage years, like who kind of shaped you? What events maybe shaped you most? Like, do any still stand out? If you're like me, you still have some of those big hallmark moments, whether they were good or bad. Like, take us through some of those that to the degree that you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in like central northern Alberta. I like to call it the Texas of Canada. Lots of guns, lots of cowboys, lots of big trucks, lots of cattle. Except it's minus 30 degrees Celsius for like 4 or 5 months out of the year.
Mm.
And we play hockey and not football.
Hmm.
I think a big hallmark moment for me, I mean, my parents got divorced when I was 3, and that was a pretty substantial moment because my dad and my mom would go on to remarry other people, and then they would both have a daughter and they would both have a son relatively at the same time. So my siblings, my sisters are the same age and my brothers are the same age. And so I grew up between these two families where everybody was relatively the same age, but they were really different characters. So like my dad and my stepdad are polar opposites. My mom and
Mm.
my stepmom, polar opposites. My sisters are opposite. My brothers are opposite. And so I just kind of went back and forth between my families, observing these very different personalities. And I think for me, I had a little bit of like orphan syndrome where I didn't really know where I fit in between those two families. I grew up being raised in my mom's house with my stepdad, and he was sort of my primary parent. But that really shaped me, seeing all these different people wondering like, why is my dad and my stepdad, why are they so different? Like, why
Mm.
is one a complete fly off the handle, loses his temper all the time, so much anger, and the other one is sort of calm and chill, but he's not really present in my life. It was a lot of questioning and observing people, and I think that really formed my ability to observe people, figure them out pretty quickly, have a sense of who people are, what makes them tick, because I just spent a lot of time doing that as a kid. So that was a big formative memory. And then, I mean, the fun one is just get in my car, man. At 16, I wanted out of the house, and my neighbor had a 79 Mustang that I absolutely loved, and it was her former husband's that had passed away. And I saved up $500 and bought that thing, and I was just out. I was
Nice.
out as often as I humanly could. I'd sneak out at night and go drive my car, go to my girlfriend's house. I drive that thing around everywhere. I always wanted to have a sense of freedom and liberation, and I think because I didn't really feel like I fit in either household, um, I really was trying to find my place in the world for a
Hmm.
long time growing
Yeah.
up. So
Yeah.
yeah,
What year did you say that car was?
79, which, well,
Oh.
I should probably preface, I think it was the first year that they made a four-cylinder Mustang.
Oh.
And so I had the economy, the like shit box
There
that
you
was all
go.
rusted out. But man, I was so excited about it. And then I would later on go on to buy a 95 5-liter Mustang GT
Okay.
and the red one with the two-door that I really
Uh-oh.
loved. But
Well, there you go.
yeah,
You talk about liberation, huh? Well, I had a 76 Chevy pickup truck and I grew up in
nice.
Oklahoma, which fit perfectly for the stereotype. But no, I thought you said 76. That's funny. But well, it sounds to me like I guess that situation of having the two worlds of families that you're back and forth in that are polar opposites personality wise, I'm guessing it can be somewhat empowering to be able to pick one or two things from each place that you think are healthy attributes or characteristics, and then you sort of build a whole person, which is you, out of
Mhm.
that, and then your experiences add to that too. But was there anything about, I mean, what you know about masculinity and manhood now, was there anything looking back that you think, wow, that stood out as something I really wanted to emulate? Or did you just kind of learn from cautionary tales of how not to be?
What's interesting is like my dad and my stepdad were very different. My stepdad, big temper, uh, would fly off the handle quite quickly. I don't think I helped. I was definitely like a little disturber. I was trying to provoke him all the time.
Hmm.
And because I was, as a kid, I was confused.
Wanted
Couldn't
attention,
understand.
right?
Yeah, I wanted attention. Didn't understand when my parents got divorced. Kind of, felt the blame for it myself. Um, and so I knew that I didn't want to be like him. I knew that I didn't want to be somebody who was so reactionary. I didn't want to be somebody that would fly off the handle and be abusive. I didn't want to be somebody that was, going to yell and tear people down. And then on the other side, I saw my dad, who was, more creative and artistic, but also, sometimes wasn't really in my life in the way that I needed him to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself pursuing him, and chasing him and like almost like I need you to be in my life more. And so I think that was really frustrating for me because the person that I learned the most about masculinity from was my grandfather. And
Okay.
he was this, he fought in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just a really like he had a big, big personality. He had these like
Mm-hmm.
steel blue eyes. His name was Norman, and it's just like a funny character. He kind of did whatever the hell he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it was ridiculous. Like I remember as a kid, he would make wine out of different fruits. Like he made apricot wine one time. Apparently it tasted like garbage, but that was just his personality, right? He wanted to try things and experiment. He rode a motorcycle until he was like 78 years old. But he taught me a lot. I mean, he taught me how to shave. He taught me how to listen to the engine and, make sure that the pistons were working well. He taught me how to mow the lawn properly, how a lawnmower worked. He really taught me just simple things. And I learned the value of just being good at things. Because as a kid, I didn't feel good at much. And
Mm-hmm.
that really hurt my sense of self-worth and confidence as a young man. And I think he saw that, and he just taught me simple things like, here's how you mow a lawn properly. And as a kid, I remember thinking like, I don't care about mowing a lawn. Like this isn't relevant to me. But there was something about, oh, grandpa's teaching me how to do this properly. And that, that felt encouraging. And then the last thing is I remember as a kid, I would go into my grandparents' room whenever they visited first thing in the morning. I'd wake up and I'd go see them. And my grandfather, when I was really young, he would tell me stories about animals, and in the stories, the animals they were animate, they were alive, they could talk, they went on these adventures, and these stories would sort of unfold and teach a very profound lesson. And it drilled into me that men care about nature, that men are tied to nature, that men are connected to something bigger than themselves, and that
Mm-hmm.
being tied into something bigger than yourself and having respect for it is incredibly important. So he passed down a lot of these lessons that I really held on to and that made me a big part of who I am today.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. And it's funny. There's a common thread with folks who have maybe a disconnected relationship with their dad. There always seems to be a grandfather that creeps into the story. And I don't know if those guys are just intuitive enough to see that there's a deficit in your life that they need to step into, right? In a man's space, like the healthy things that you needed to learn, he knew you weren't getting showed or taught, so he stepped in. And that's just what that generation, man, they were just teachers and showers. Like they did by living an example, right? And so that's how we learned. But I wonder kind of wonder how your connection is with your dad or your stepdad now. I don't know if they're still around, but if they are, I mean, as you got older, how did
Mm.
that evolve?
Yeah, it's great now on both fronts. I
Nice.
think I had to have a number of conversations and some confrontations with both of them in their own way to let things go and move on and set things straight. But a big part of what I had to do was to forgive my stepdad, and kind of put myself in his shoes of what it must have been like to, marry this woman who had this kid who clearly did not want him around,
Mm,
and made that really clear. Like I made that clear all the time. I did not want him around. And I think that was hard for him. And as a young kid, even as a teenager, I couldn't see that. But as an adult, I could look back and say, that must have been brutal. That must have been hard. You're trying to raise your own family. You're trying to do the right thing by this kid that's not yours. And so, he and I have had a number of conversations and sort of cleared the air on a bunch of things. And we have a great relationship now. And then same thing with my dad. He and I have a saying that every son has the right to be angry with their father. Every son
mm,
has the right to be angry with their father at some point. And it's my belief that it's the job of the father to be able to hear that anger, to be able to
mm-hmm.
hear that frustration, that disappointment from their son. And, I think even, I mean, it happens even in the Bible, right? I mean, there's a
Yep.
point where Christ's like, well, Father, where are you?
Yeah.
Like, where are you? Like, what's
Yeah.
going on?
Right.
You're supposed to be here for me in my hour of need. And I
Mm,
think that's the role between father and son, is that our dads can never live up to who we want them to be,
yeah.
because I think as young boys, we want our fathers to be this larger than life hero. And sometimes they are, right? Sometimes they really are these larger than life characters and heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And then inevitably something happens where there's a fall from grace, or
Yeah.
or we lose them, and that's
Mm-hmm.
devastating. But I had to
Well,
have a number of conversations with my dad where I had to say, here's what was frustrating, and here's the relationship I'd like to have with you. Are you
mm-hmm.
interested in that? And now he's very much in my life, and he's in my kid's life, which is fantastic.
Well, so do you have sons?
I have one son and one
One son.
daughter. Yep.
Okay. What would your son, I guess at this I don't know how old he is, but
He's 4.
what would
He's
be
almost 4.
okay, well, I mean, are there things that you see kind of from the flip side of that scenario you just gave us that maybe as dads we just know? Is it going to be easier to know that we are just not ever going to be perfect and
Mm.
that there is always going to be that thing? We don't know what it is, maybe, but our sons will have the right to maybe be frustrated with something about us. Like, what would that be? Fast forward, I don't know, 3 or 4 years for your son, like about you, if you're looking kind of inward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty intense person. I think most of the time, like I pursue things that are interesting to me, uh, and I think it just in many ways I can just be an intense person. And so, I think even with him, I can be quick to like I can be pretty strict with him because I know the
Mm-hmm.
world's hard. I know he's going to go through hell sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing that I ever want is to send my son out into the world not ready for the harshness that awaits him, you know, and the
Mm-hmm.
hardship that he's going to have to endure. But I think sometimes I can take that too far because I mean the kid's, 3.5, right? He's almost 4. So it's like he's still little.
Yeah.
And so, I think probably at some point there'll be some frustration with like, why are you being so hard on me? Why are you so strict with me? But I really try, and even now with him being as little as he is, like kids know, their bodies know, their nervous systems know
Mm-hmm.
when you cross a line. Their
Yep.
bodies know when you cross a line. And so I really try and be mindful that if I ever act in a way that I don't respect, that I don't want to deploy with my son, if I raise my voice or I yell at him and I'm short with him, I will, as quickly as possible, try and remedy that. I'll sit him down and I'll say, sorry, Daddy yelled at you. Sorry, Daddy was angry with you. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
hold him and I'll just apologize. And he gets it, even though he's
Mm-hmm.
so young, he gets it. So
Yeah.
my commitment is to always try and be that father that acknowledges when he has messed up and to just take ownership over that, because I want to instill that in him. It's like, I'm not going to get it right all the time, but I can be somebody that acknowledges when I've got it wrong.
That's good. I mean, I've had to, you know, swallow a little bit of humble pie with my kids and ask forgiveness and apologize. And I think dads feel like that makes them weak. And, I had to do it this week, actually. I mean, I made some comments about something on television that I felt like was being forced down our throats. You know how media is, and you know how the alphabet soup people and those kinds of things. And I just made a comment that was kind of off, and my kids were like, wow, and so I kind of said, okay, let me just tell you, first of all, this is not weakness, but I want to apologize, and I want you to know what it takes for me to have to come to you and apologize about this. But yeah, I maybe shouldn't have said it the way I said it, but here's where I stand. So I think guys are maybe just the way to word it. I don't know if they're just afraid to look weak, but sounds like you've figured that out early, and so at an early age with your son. But um, what talk about, you mentioned the Bible, and we, this is a faith-based podcast, and I'm sure you talk about spirituality a lot. I know you do because I've seen some of your work. Where do you stand with Christianity? Where do you stand with your faith? How did you get there? Maybe kind of how you've grown in that. Talk about some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's evolved a lot over the years. I was raised going to church every Sunday. I think for me, part of it was this sort of classic, we go to church on Sundays and learn all these things, but then we leave the parking lot and some of that goes out the window, as people are getting yelled at in the car and there's no forgiveness and there's harshness
Yep.
and meanness. And it's like, I think as a kid, again, because I was watching so closely, a big part of it was how can we be living, or not even living. It's like we're not living what is being preached and talked about. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, that was really frustrating. And so, when I turned 18, I kind of left. I moved out on my own, and I explored a lot. I mean, I studied theology, and I sort of studied different religions, and I really had a questioning, that I was curious about, because I was raised in the Christian church and went to church, and it's always been ingrained in me. But it was something that I had to come to on my own. I
Yeah.
had to find my way to it. And it was something that I couldn't really accept, because there was just that discrepancy between what I was being taught in the church and then how things were going at home.
Yeah.
And I had to find my own way to God, and I want to try and do that with, our family, our kids. I mean, we pray every night at dinner, and my son's favorite thing is to like throw some random thing into the nightly prayer, right? Like
Yeah.
French fries or chocolate,
Yeah.
or cookies or something like that. It's like we're
Yeah.
we're praying, and he's like, I'm praying for cookies. It's like, all
There
right,
you
buddy.
go.
But he's taken an interest in it, and every time we drive past the church now, he's like, can we go into that church? I want to go to that church.
Mm.
And so it's really interesting. He doesn't have a sense of denomination. He doesn't have a sense of separation in that way. It's just, church is a place where people gather, and there's something happening. And so
Mm.
for me right now, it's just about creating that spark and that interest within him, and then just promoting that within the household and having devotion on Sundays. And yeah,
Wow.
so it's been really interesting, but it's been a long sort of journey and circle all the way back around.
Yeah. No, it's good. I mean, it's good to just lay the foundation and then eventually let them own it themselves. And we had to do that. Our kids were raised in church. I was not. My wife was not. And we got there later in life, but we raised them there, but at the same time, it's not by default. When they get to be a certain age, it can't be mom and dad's faith. It's got to be theirs. And that's where it really starts to take hold of your life and really from the inside out working on you. You do a lot of work kind of shifting into what you do in your training platform and your coaching. So body, soul, and spirit, like we're three-part beings, right? And you cover a lot of the soul, which mind, will, and emotions, as we know, and talk a little bit about spirit, man. So body, you mentioned nature and kind of our connection as men, and it's a natural wiring. I think it's a natural wiring to experience physical adversity and overcome it and then grow from it. I think we have a lot of guys that right? Avoid it. You made a comment. I think I have a quote here from you that says, "Too many men have traded sovereignty, self determination, and masculinity for comfort and validation." Well, I mean, proof's in the pudding. I just pulled an article from CDC of 2024, and almost half the men in America are considered obese. Um, and from ages, I guess, I don't think that was like, it was like 40 to 59 or something like that. I don't, 55 maybe, but it's a little alarming, right? So, what do you do to incorporate maybe the body part of the three pronged beings that we are with the training you do?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we talk about is getting into the body, getting into your nervous system. And your nervous system is how you really experience your world. It's like you have your senses, you have how you see things, how you hear things, how you smell things, how you taste things. But then you have your actual direct experience, which is your body and your emotions. So we teach a lot of like nervous system practices, regulation, using breath work, but then then it's just the physical side of things. I mean, I work
Mm-hmm.
out 5, 6 days a week. I like to
Yeah.
lift. I like to lift
Mm-hmm.
heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I grew up playing hockey, and I do Muay Thai. And every single week I train in Muay Thai, which I absolutely love. And I really promote that with guys. It's like if you're going through a hard time, some of what you need to be able to do is just to get back into your physical body, to know that you can go do some hard things even when you don't want to, because usually that's the part that starts to fail when the relationship's struggling, when you're struggling financially, when things aren't going well at work. It's so much easier to be like, maybe I'll sleep in this morning. Maybe I won't go work out. And we lose the disconnection to our body and our physical form. And then when we do that, what most men do is they over index on the rational mind. And so
Mm-hmm.
then they're just stuck in their thoughts and they're ruminating. And then there's performance anxiety and self-deprecating, and the way that they talk to themselves becomes brutal. And so for me, a big part of it, and we have this membership where we've got like 800, 900 guys from around the world called the Alliance. And part of what we do in there is we have physical challenges,
Mm-hmm.
right? So sometimes we'll do 50 burpees a day for a month,
Yeah.
or you got to work out, and do a specific regimen for the next like 3 or 4 weeks. So I think it's a huge part that a lot of men, I think that it's funny because I remember seeing an article on like CNN or something like that was talking about somebody sent it to me saying that like being in shape is right wing, it's like it's conservative.
Oh.
It's
Oh.
like how are you going to villainize working out? Like working
Says
out is
the beta,
definitely
right? Says the
right.
beta. I'm thinking,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
working out is definitely the most non-political thing on the freaking planet. But it's really, really important. I do think that a lot of young men have been conditioned to, I mean, it's so much easier to just sit on your couch, watch porn, play video games,
Yep.
check out from the world. And all the data shows that, right? Young men
Yep.
are in less relationships than ever before, having less
Yep.
sex than ever before. They're working less than ever before. They're living at home more than ever before. And so when you look at the data around young men, it's like, man, young men are really struggling. And so where you start with that is just use your body, get
Yep.
good at using your body. And if you can do that, then a lot of the skills that you need, the discipline, the mindset, the doing hard shit, facing failure, a lot of the skills that you need in order to be good with women or, trek through in your business, those things start to get built with your body.
100%. I mean, I'm 52 and I think I don't know, lifted weights for maybe the better part of 2 decades or more, I guess, and pretty consistent. Like ever since college, I can remember, ever since I can remember, and I still do it. Like my kids, I mean, when they played sports, they had to do it. My sons, and then they kind of stepped away, I guess, because maybe I crammed it down their throat. I don't know, but we forced that, right? So now they don't really do much lifting, and I'm hoping they get back into it. But I've thought leading by example was just going to be by default a way to get them on board. I mean, do you have any advice for dads that are listening, maybe that are trying to do the same thing? And like, yeah, I can make them do it, but I mean, I got a 26, 23-year-old son. They don't live here. So, and an
Right.
18-year-old who's working all the time. So I don't know. Help me get back to them back in the weight room, Connor.
Yeah, man. I mean, what all I can say is what I'm doing with my son, which is I just have him around. I have him around it. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't try and force it on him, and I just let him take interest in the things in my gym. I've got gymnastics rings hanging
Mm-hmm.
from the ceiling that I'll use sometimes for doing pull-ups and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. And he loves those, and I have like the stretch bands and like little
Yeah.
small weights that my wife uses, and he'll mess around with those things. And so, I think that can be helpful very, very early on, which is just have them around it. And it can
Yeah.
be cumbersome sometimes, especially when you've got a young kid in the gym while you're trying to work out,
Mm-hmm.
but they start to take interest and then they want to be a part of it. And so any single time that dads ask me, how do you get, because my son does breath work with me sometimes. My son will pray with me. My son will,
Mm-hmm.
he'll attempt to like meditate with me sometimes.
Mm, yeah.
And, dads will say, how do you get your son involved in that? And it's just like, just have him around while you're doing that. And he will gravitate towards it. What we do as men often is we want to force something, right? It's like, I want
Mm,
to teach you this. I want you to engage in this. And we take a sort of heavy-handed approach, and it can, especially for young boys, if there's tension between you and that young boy,
yeah.
he's
Yeah.
going to naturally oppose whatever you put in front of him,
Yeah.
and he's going to push it away. So,
Yeah.
as for the kids that are older and they're teenagers or they're in their early
Mm-hmm.
20s, I think it's just a big part of it is like sharing what you're doing,
Yeah.
and sharing that it is a passion for you, and continuing to share your wins and some of your
Yeah.
setbacks,
Yeah.
and why it matters to you, and they'll probably find their way to it.
Yeah.
Especially if they, if you got a good relationship with them, they'll probably find
Yeah.
their way to it.
Yeah, and I do. I'd like to think I do. I know I do. And I think it's just, you know, maybe the Bible talks about train a child up in the way he should go, and then when he's older, he will not depart from it. So I think maybe there's seasons where they ebb and flow, right? And I think they'll gravitate back because they'll realize the necessity of showing up capable, right? I mean, when you walk in a room, not that people need to know you lift weight, but you need to walk into a room feeling confident that you can be capable to either protect, lead physically, or just whatever, hold your own, I guess. But anyway, I wanted to. That was selfish for me to ask that, so I appreciate you the training, not the therapy, the training on that one. Well, okay, so if we're talking about men who maybe have traded in some things for the comfort and the self-validation, like it's almost, to me, tell me if I'm wrong, but it feels like a paradox of some kind where we try so hard to succeed, right? We work so hard, we build this wealth, we build an empire of a company, or we're just doing really well in life in order to have a better life, which then almost yields comfort and convenience and all the modern things that we love. Then people start to validate us because we're doing well. Okay, so we're not seeking all that, but all of a sudden, full circle, here comes comfort and validation. Where do we, I guess, process through that with somebody maybe that's reading that statement and thinking, well, I like to be comfortable. I don't mind validation. I think it's the intent, right, of not seeking all that. It's just a
Yeah.
byproduct of what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, look, yeah, I don't think that people need to be uncomfortable in their lives, but I do think that we should seek some discomfort actively. And there's some research that's coming out now about I don't remember exactly what it's called, but there's a specific part of your brain that gets developed when you do hard things that you actively do not want to do. So when
Mm,
you seek discomfort, there's a part of your brain that's important that gets developed. I heard
mm.
Andrew Huberman talk about it. I can't remember. He was talking with David
Okay.
Goggins. I can't
Nice.
remember the name of the part of the brain because it was a complicated name. But so yes, we should actively seek discomfort in certain areas of our life and then enjoy the fruits of our labor,
Yeah.
enjoy the things like for me, I like to travel, I like to hike, I like to go camping, I like to take my family out and do that. And that's a part of why I work so hard is that I have the leisure to do
Yeah.
those things. I don't do those things to sit on my ass, all weekend and watch Netflix.
Yeah.
And then, smashing popcorn and potato chips, right? Like that's just seeking comfort. But those things can be alluring because it's easy.
Mm.
And I think as men in modern culture and Western culture, we've kind of been sold this bill of goods by modernity that
Yep.
says that the end goal that we should be working for is ease. And that ain't it. It might be ease in our relationship. It might be ease with the people that we love. It might be ease in being able to go and do the things that we feel fulfilled by. But it doesn't mean that the process of working out, working on our relationship is meant to be easy. Those things are innately meant to be challenging. And your ability
Mm.
to pursue that is actually what produces the ease on the other side. So, I think part of it is that the other piece is that I think that we as men are conditioned in some ways to attach our worth to what we do.
Yep.
And if what we're doing isn't good, then we look at ourselves as flawed or broken. And if what we're producing isn't enough, then we see ourselves as, not valuable in some ways. And so I think we as men have to, in some ways, we do have to be able to develop a sense of I can do really hard things, I can be successful, I can be competent, but we also have to be able to have some sense of value and worth that
Mm.
is separate from our performance, that's separate from all of the task list, to-do list stuff that we execute on. We have to just actually be able to develop a sense of like, I like who I am outside of everything that I can do. Because
Mm.
most of the time for men, those two things are not separate. It's I only like myself. I'll only let myself appreciate myself and have gratitude for myself when I execute on everything in my life. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm a piece of crap and there's something wrong with me. And that's where a lot of self-hatred and self-criticism starts to come in when we're not doing the things that we think we should be doing. But sometimes we can't do the things we think we should be doing because we're not actually giving ourselves the credit that we actually deserve. Does that land?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I could see where that would get us in a a psychological whirlwind of sorts. Almost, by that thought pattern of this and then this, but then a full circle of this, and then it's just a repetitive, a perpetual unhealthy cycle. You, I think, talked about how I guess you call it suck it up, stuff it down, pour some whiskey on it, right, until it's sufficiently numb. Okay. I don't know if that you're speaking from experience of a season of life where you maybe were at your version of rock bottom, but if you were, talk about some of that, and then what was maybe your defining moment of correction where you sort of rewrited the ship?
Yeah, I mean, the first line of my book is a man's work begins with pain. And it's the acknowledgement that until you, as a man, learn how to deal with the pain that you're carrying, whether it's physical, psychological, relational, emotional, that pain will direct your life in some way and you'll feel out of control.
Hmm.
And not only will that pain control your life and you'll feel out of control, but you will have to deploy some type of coping mechanism. It might be weed, it might be porn, it might be prostitutes, it might be drugs, it might be womanizing. There's a number of, it might be gambling, but
Hmm.
you're going to have to deploy some type of coping strategy to deal with what's happening inside of you. So, and for me, that's exactly what happened. I bottomed out. My life looked great in my late 20s. I had a great career traveling the world, had my Mustang, I had my motorcycle, I had a beautiful girlfriend. Uh, and so on the outside, things looked like they were going great, but internally, I hated myself.
Mm.
And I had never really reconciled with the pain that I experienced growing up as a kid and some of the things that I experienced and I went through. And because of that, I sabotaged everything that was good in my life. And this is what a lot of men do. I call it a pseudo initiation, a pseudo initiation. It's when we haven't been initiated into manhood, because part of initiation is teaching you what to do as a man when you feel powerless. Because
Mm.
usually when we as men feel powerless, that's where we act out. I feel
Mhm.
powerless in my marriage, in my relationship. What are you doing? You're yelling, you're angry, you're attacking, you are justifying unhealthy behavior, you're doing all kinds of stuff. Why? Because you feel powerless. So
Mhm.
initiation was meant to teach you as a man what to do when you feel powerless, and it was meant to teach you what to do with pain. If you look at a lot of initiatory practices, what happens to the young boy? He goes through a process of experiencing pain in some way, shape, or form. The pain of being taken away from his family, from his mom, from the village, the pain of having to be on his own in the wilderness. Sometimes it's very direct, right? You have to put your hand into a glove with bullet ants stinging you, which is apparently one of the most excruciating things that you can go
Right,
through.
right.
So, pain is an active thing that we as men are meant to learn how to navigate, process, metabolize, whatever word you want to use for it. But we are meant to learn what to do with it. And in our modern culture, what men are taught right now is suppress it, stuff it down. And the more you can stuff it down as a man, then the more you can pretend like you've got your shit together and that you're manly and masculine. But inside, you know that that's not true because you have all of these coping mechanisms that are just holding that pain in place as kind of band-aids for the bullet hole wounds that you have in your heart and your soul and your body. So for me, it wasn't until after I bottomed out that I started to seek some support. I found a mentor, older man in my life that was like 72 that gave me some guidance. I kind of had a real old school apprenticeship with him. Uh, he was educated in Jungian psychology, and I spent 2 years basically apprenticing with him, working on his farm, farming asparagus and helping him with his Rottweilers and chopping wood and doing those types of things. And he taught me psychology and he supported me and he trained me. Um, and so, that in many ways kind of saved my life and put me on a different path.
Wow.
And so I'm very fortunate because that's not the case for a lot of men. A lot of men don't bottom out and have some, elder in their life that appears and supports them.
Yeah.
A lot of men they just don't have that. There's a vacuum of eldership, elderhood, of
Mhm.
masculinity within our culture. So a lot of men are left with their pain and their rock bottom.
Yeah.
And it's why I do the work that I do now. And it's why we created the community that we have. But we as men need to learn what to do with our pain. What do you do with the pain of having been a kid that watched your parents get divorced or had your mom die when you were 13 years old or, watched your dad go through cancer or, watched abuse happen in your house or addiction happen in your home. Those are things they leave an imprint on you as a kid that you can pretend doesn't have an impact, but somewhere
Mhm.
inside of you, it does.
Yeah.
And it's not until you decide I'm going to deal with that things will actually fundamentally change.
And that's good. And I mean, you got there probably a little quicker than most. And I wonder what is the barrier to entry for guys to get there mentally, to acknowledge, oh, you know what? I am carrying some weight around from my past that has been an anchor unnecessarily in my life. Like we're just conditioned to, like you said, either deny it or just kind of dust the dirt off, right? Rub some dirt on it and move on because guys just deal with it. And so we go deal with it in our way that we think is the way the world told us to be a man. And so we've got all this collateral damage. So, you know, how did you I guess when did you acknowledge it was your childhood? Like you went through rock bottom and you're like, oh, you woke up one day and thought, wow, I'm kind of dealing with some trauma from my childhood. I don't, how did you come up with that?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I'm going to lay a couple of things out here. I think
Yeah.
number one, um, it's very easy to look at the dysfunction in your present day life and be like, but no, this is the problem, right? It's my
Okay.
gambling that's the problem. It's my porn
Okay.
addiction that's the problem. It's my, right? And
It's a symptom. Yeah.
it's a symptom, but the reality is that all of those things how were created somewhere. And oftentimes, and I'm not saying that a blanket statement of like, everything traces back to your childhood.
Mm,
However, a lot of our neurology, our brain, our behavior, our attachment, how we show up in relationship to people, our nervous system, all of that's being wired in the first 5 years of your life. We know
mm,
this unequivocally. So all of that's being wired in the first 5 years of your life. So the imprints of what happens in the first 5 years of your life is really, really important. Now, I didn't know any of that at the time.
mm,
Um, but I did know 100% before I bottomed out that that's where I was going. I knew that. And every man that I have ever worked with in the last decade knows when he's heading towards a bottom. He knows. He can feel it.
mm.
He knows he's doing some shit that's pulling him down in that direction, and he knows. And so part of what we need to do is confess. You have to confess. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychologists, in my opinion, of all time, said that confession is the first step in any therapeutic process. And it's the same thing in any religious process, right? It's like the confession is the first step. But it's the step that most of us as men do not want to take because we think that it makes us weak or broken, less of a man, etc. But it actually takes a man to confess his sins, right? It takes a
For
man to
sure.
confess his sins. And it's hard. It's brutal. And it's the main lesson that I learned from bottoming out was that when I don't admit the stuff that's happening in my life and I'm not willing to talk about it, or I'm not willing to get support, or I'm not willing to say I'm struggling in this way to somebody that I respect that I know can help me, then I'm just going to make things worse. Like I'm going to pull myself down deeper into the dysfunction. And maybe the people that are listening out there don't think that way, but for me, that's just what happens in my life. And I think what's interesting is when you look at something like addiction, a lot of AA, I mean, the first step in Alcoholics Anonymous is admit that you have a problem.
Admitting. Hmm.
And the funny thing is, and most people don't know this actually, the guy that started Alcoholics Anonymous, his brother was a client of Carl Jung, and he had an addiction problem. And he went to Jung, and they were having sessions, and Jung said, "Your problem is not a psychological problem. Your problem is a spiritual problem." And
Hmm.
that that became part of the beginnings of what Alcoholics Anonymous was.
Wow.
And he said, a part of your spiritual problem is that you need to confess what's happening, what's actually true. So I think that's a big step that a lot of men need to take if they want to circumvent the massive divorce, the blowout with their kids, the rock bottom that they think is coming in their business or financially because they're gambling or doing whatever. They need to be willing to find a place in a space where they can confess, where they can be honest about what's happening and be able to start to get some support because nothing will change until you do.
Yeah. That's it's powerful, man. And I wonder too, had that older gentleman not come into your life as a mentor, do you think you still would have gotten free? I mean, since you were already in the process of acknowledging kind of those things. I mean, because you, like you said, guys don't always have that person. So, how are you? I mean, you kind of are that to people. Not that you're an elderly man that's training people on a farm, but you kind of are getting people to a version of that model, right? Of some
Yeah.
sort of mentorship and sort of that sage for people because you've been down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know, man. What are some evidences out there in culture that either we have a long way to go or we've come a long
Mm.
way as far as men and where we need our reaching our full, I guess, capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer the question before, and I'll touch on this
Okay.
one, which is, we're wounded in relationship and we have to heal in relationship. We get hurt in relationship and we have to heal in relationship. And one of the biggest challenges that we as men face is we we buy into the notion that we should be able to fix all of our problems by ourselves. And
Yep.
we do not, we try and do it all in isolation. We try and fix the
Mm,
marital problems. We try and fix our addictions. We try and fix our dysfunctions in isolation. And very rarely does it work. Sometimes it works for some men. I don't want to say it never does, but very rarely does it work because the majority of the time, what men are dealing with are relational pain, things that happened in relationship to an ex, with a parent, with a friend, whatever it is. And so we have to be able to heal in community. And that,
hmm
again, is part of an initiation process. When a boy would go through initiation, he'd get brought back into the village, into the tribe, into the community, and people would welcome him back.
hmm
And so I think I'm hopeful in some ways because more and more and more resources and communities and spaces are being created for men to have these conversations, to do this work, to get the support, to support one another. And, this is what we used to do as men. We'd sit around the campfire and talk about the relational problems that we had.
True.
It's like it's just in the last sort of like 100 years, where maybe 150 years, where it became a big no-no to have any type of conversation with other men about what was actually going on in your life. I mean, the Spartans had something called goji, which was this specific training for young boys, and they would learn hand-to-hand combat, and they would learn how to stand shield to shield, and they would learn how to kill another man in the morning, and then in the afternoon they would go and learn how to dance, how to write poetry, how to
Mm,
sing, how to create music. And so there was a more holistic version of what it meant to be a man.
hmm
And they shared that camaraderie together. They would they would dance together. They would sing together. I'm not saying you need to go and, do a dance with your buddies,
Right.
but we do need to make it more commonplace to have a more full conversation about who we are and what's going on in our life. And I think that's very much happening.
That's cool. Yeah, and I apologize. I did ask you two questions all at once there.
You're
I just
good.
kind of threw it,
I
had
usually
you
ask like
drinking from a
five.
fire hose there. But to your point, I don't see many people doing CPR on themselves, right? Um, so it feels like that there's a need for someone else to resuscitate us psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. So yeah, can't do it by yourself. Now, what I did ask was, have we come a long way, or do we have a long way to go? Or yes,
Yeah,
to all of that.
I think we've come a long way. I again, I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like I think the sort of the age of just being this like complete lone wolf, Marlboro man, um, is sort of coming to an end in some ways because like we just know that as human beings, for the average human being isolated like that is
Mhm.
completely unhealthy. It's not psychologically healthy, it's not emotionally healthy, it's really hard. And and I think we've come a long way in the sense that spaces like this, your podcast, there's lots of podcasts and communities and books out there now that are supporting men in different, whatever it is, different political leanings, different like religious backgrounds, non-secular, secular, that are
Mhm.
supporting men and just in building brotherhood again. And
Mhm.
I think that that's so valuable. I just think it's so valuable. So I think we've come a long way, and there's still a long way to go. I think we
Yeah,
need to bring back a culture of initiation for our
it's good.
boys. And I think we need to bring back a culture of having elder men that are around us, not just old guys,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
we don't want to listen to, that don't have experience, that never dealt with their shit, but
Mhm.
like real elders, real men that when you're around them, you can't help but feel like, man, there's something from this man that I need to learn and I want to be around him,
Yeah,
And so I think that's where we're moving, hopefully.
that's good. No, that's good. I appreciate it, and I know we're up against it, man. And I was going to ask you about your event coming up with those guys this year, the Men's Forge with Hagner,
Yeah.
Mickler, and Vincent, and those guys. But that's to your point. That's a little bit of what we're doing because I think technology's created a virtual world that we can all get comfortable in and feel like we're getting information, right? Feel like it's cathartic, but at the same time it might be, but at the same time it's not that in the village, hands on in front of the campfire, like pushing and pulling hard stuff, heavy stuff with each other. So what you guys are doing, I think, is going to be a little bit unique from what I hear than what
Yeah.
your standard cookie cutter men's event is. So, man, close us out with something with guys, something you want to take away that that you feel like maybe I glossed over or didn't cover, or man, just something in a nutshell of what you want the guys to hear from you.
I think you did a great job, man. I think it was a great conversation. I appreciate your questions, and I think I think the only thing that I would say is there's a line in there's a song called "A Father's Song" by this guy Alan Stone, and he said, "I did some things wrong, and I apologized and showed you what it's like to forgive." I
Wow.
apologized and showed you what it's like to forgive, and he's talking about his relationship to his son. And
Wow.
I think that's part of it. A lot of the men that I work with, they don't really know what forgiveness really looks like. And they're carrying
Yeah.
around a lot of anger and frustration in their heart because they never saw an example of a man who knew how to forgive. And I wish for every man listening to this that they become a man that knows how to forgive and can teach the generations of sons that come after us how to forgive other people.
It's good. Perfect way to put a bow on this. Man, it's been an honor to get to meet you. I hope to
Likewise.
stay in touch. Audience, with that, he has been the one and only Connor Beaton. We've been last in line. Be blessed.